Elementary school back then as a kid, love it or hate it. It seems to evoke so many memories though. Whether it's the smell when you walk in the school, cross between peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and crayons, or those distinct white ceiling tiles you'll see on top of the classroom where it has all those circular dots. And the fluorescent lights that were bare that didn't have the transparent clear protective housing for some reason, but instead had those metal plates that went up and down it that seemed to serve no purpose but aesthetics. And many of the teachers who were often young, it makes you wonder these days looking back, did some of them hang out during the weekends? Did they sometimes party it up, go to clubs, even get drunk? I mean, many of the teachers that I have, if they did that, I have to say it's really hard to picture that. And then the lunch food, the distinctive square pizza and the macaroni and cheese that looked like an ice cream scoop. And my school often gave us Jell-O as a dessert delicacy, and it wiggled as we walked towards the seat. And it was good. Sometimes it was red, sometimes it was green. Well, in other words, I want to talk about my unique autism and ADHD experience way back when I was a little kid in school, way back in the late 80s, early 90s, back before autism and ADHD was even mainstream in the main public, back before it was even an internet sensation on YouTube and TikTok. I want to talk about my unique experiences back then, both good and bad, and how I was accommodated. All right, well, let's get started. When I was 3 years old, I took various tests from various doctors, and a lot of them said I had to be institutionalized. I wouldn't be able to be mainstream in a mainstream school because of my communication and speech delays. I struggled with speaking and communicating in full sentences, and I didn't be able to do that until I was age 3. So I didn't take normal kindergarten classes like most kids. Instead, I went to various special needs schools. And I went to 3 different ones before first grade. First, back when I was 4, I went to this one school called Howard School over in Acushnet, Massachusetts for kids with various disabilities, mainly focused on people with speech delays, focusing on communication and speaking. It was a tiny little school with only 3 classrooms with about 10 students each, and it was about the size of a modern day Dollar General. The building in that school, I'm convinced, was really old, as the classrooms had these old porcelain lights with these glass housings that looked really cool and antique. And the bathroom even had a toilet that where when you flushed it, you had to pull a chain from up above. I really enjoyed the school a lot. I enjoyed the long bus rides across town, even though sometimes I didn't really, but I did for the most part. And I enjoyed the fun activities we used to do. We mainly focused on speech and communication, and the things that we learned was made fun. Colored in a lot of pictures, and when we learned letters, we focused on 1 letter a week, and we would make these books where we would color in pictures and put books together, and then read the books where we learn a specific letter for that week and then move on. We often sat in a circle and was encouraged to talk about different things, like we had show and tell, and we were encouraged to communicate and talk, which I thought was fun. Sometimes we would do things like reach in a bag where we wouldn't know what an object was and feel the objects and try to guess what the object was by telling the teacher what it was by describing the feelings. We also did things to work on hand-eye coordination, which was something I didn't really need but considered kind of fun. Like we put pegs in a board, or sometimes we worked on what was called geoboards, which was a square board with a bunch of pegs in it where we would put rubber bands around it to make like geometric images and things like that out of rubber bands. I rode a short school bus to and from school, and I didn't understand why I didn't ride a different school bus like the longer school bus my sister rode when she went to school. I also didn't understand why I went to a different school. And this often made me feel confused. It often made me wonder, why do things seem to happen differently when it comes to me? I used to have long bus rides, often at least an hour long, and I used to go all the way across town. And I used to enjoy looking at the power lines during the trip. I thought they were intense. I also remember being friends with one of the kids that I went on a bus ride with. His name is Christopher Dunn. I want to give him a shout out. And we used to just talk and kind of hang out. We never hung out outside of school, but we considered ourselves friends. I remember during recess time in the afternoon, we would go outside and play. We had a small playground in the back, and I used to run around like a choo-choo train because I was obsessed with trains back then. And I remember we were always the first ones to come out and play, and then the 2 other classes would eventually come out too. And just the anticipation of the other classes coming out would get me so excited. And when the classes finally came out, I used to just get so excited running around like a train. Just something about the other kids just coming out. I don't know what it was. It would just excite me so much. On occasions, we would be the only one out there playing, and when that would happen, I would wait the whole entire recess for the other classes to come out, and when they didn't, I would often get really disappointed. Or, if the other classes came out first before we did, I would get really upset to the point of often having meltdowns. I think this came from my autism part of me, where when I experienced something enjoyable, I would often try to seek the same sort of pleasure by seeking a similar routine that would cause me to experience the same sort of enjoyable experience. During lunch, I used to love just sitting around with all the people, especially with a lot of people with lunch boxes, and I liked how the way the table looked all cluttered because it reminded me of a power station. I used to pretend a bunch of corridors of miniature power lines would branch out in different directions from the table I was sitting at, and served whatever kind of purpose I believe power lines did for the world during that time. Some of the things that I remember that I didn't like about Howard School during that time, however, was one, a lot of the kids in the class often had runny noses. And man, when I saw kids with runny noses, man, it would just gross me out. I even remember throwing up one time. 2, during that time we had a Christmas play, and this may not sound like that big of a deal, but most of the kids in the class got to be reindeers, and I really wanted to be a reindeer really bad, but I couldn't. And for some reason, as a 4-year-old person, I took that really personal, like I wasn't good enough or something to be a reindeer. 3, every week we had a special day where we got to watch a movie in the afternoon. Yes, this may sound fun, however, for me, I actually didn't enjoy it, and it was simply because of the way the TV was positioned. It was positioned too high where I had to look up while watching the movie, and it was very painful and uncomfortable trying to watch the movie while looking up like this the whole time during an hour-and-a-half long movie. So instead, I would end up just not watching it. I would get bored out of my mind in a very crowded space with a bunch of other kids, some of them with runny noses. Obviously, that would have been an easy fix, as they just simply lowered the TV a little bit. But, you know, obviously I was too young to communicate about that, never mind the fact that I had a disability that made communication hard as a 4-year-old, 5-year-old. Another thing was, we would go on this special field trip once a week where we'd go to this big swimming pool at the YMCA over in New Bedford, Massachusetts. And we would have these young adult women that would carry us around in the water and teach us how to swim, and we'd sing a bunch of songs. And you would think as a kid during that time it'd be something enjoyable, but I actually didn't enjoy it simply for one reason, that was the chlorine in the swimming pool. I thought the smell of the chlorine and the feeling of the chlorine was really strong, and it got to the point I actually just did not enjoy swimming at the Y at all, even though I think other kids probably did enjoy it. In spite of that fact, I get so nostalgic over the YMCA over in New Bedford. I could still remember the patterns of the tiles and the different color schemes the different tiles used to use in the various rooms, such as the changing rooms, the pool room, and the main lobby. And I will never forget, whenever we would enter the Y, one thing that used to stick out for me was the unique pattern of the sperm whale as a carpet, and then the smell of the chlorine when we would get to the pool, and then when we would finish, having snacks over at the vending machines. Another thing I didn't like during that school was the sound of the fire alarm during the fire drills. As an autistic person, I often get sensitive and dislike certain loud noises, and when it came to fire drills during that school, that was no exception. Like, the fire alarm there wasn't just a normal buzz you'd hear in most schools or commercial buildings. This was like a high-pitched, multi-horn blare that almost sounded like an air raid siren or a tornado siren at a constant tone, and it was a scary sound. And lastly, halfway through the year, we had this special ceremony for certain kids who I guess behaved well and did their assignments well, like I guess colored in the lines and things like that. I had to watch and I didn't participate. And most of the class actually participated in the ceremony where they walked along, all the parents were there, and they went up the stage and they got these awards. And they also wore these buttons, and I love wearing pins, and they had Kermit the Frog on it. And I just did not understand why I wasn't in this ceremony when most of the class was. And you know what, I took it very personally. I wasn't sure why. Again, I took it inward and I felt ashamed, like maybe I'm not good enough. Is there something wrong with me? Is it just because I'm different again? I just didn't understand why. I just want to let you know, I don't want to make it sound like I'm complaining. It was no one's fault and there was no one to blame. I'm sure many of these situations would have been easily resolved and people would have been more than happy to resolve them if they were aware. But I just didn't know how to communicate at that time. And as an autistic person, this is just a simple reminder that it's really important to communicate whenever there's issues. Well, once we graduated, we had another graduation ceremony that this time I did participate in, and we did get to wear those Kermit the Frog buttons again too, which I was really happy to finally wear one. And after I graduated, I actually wore that button for 2 weeks straight every day because I loved it. One thing I found kind of strange is once we had graduated from that school became abandoned and vacant for many years, and the whole staff migrated to another school called East Fairhaven School, where they continued their curriculum and classes, where I actually went to as well. But it's really strange how that school suddenly was just abandoned, completed with twining vines, green roof succulents with broken windows. According to Google Earth, that school has now been restored and is now a library, but the old Howard School will forever be in my heart and in my permanent memory. always giving me nostalgic, happy feelings overall, where I admired the people that I met as well as the teachers, and the overall support that I considered helpful. As I grew older as a 5-year-old, I experienced my first summer break. My interest in trains grew and blossomed, same with my interest in power lines. We went on various trips like beaches over in Cape Cod, which I really enjoyed. But I also enjoyed school too, and I was ready to start my second school when I was a 5-year-old over in East Fairhaven School. East Fairhaven School was a normal school with normal kids. However, we went to a special classroom with a teacher that we had over at the previous school that I didn't have at the time but was next door to me, and we learned similar things like we did in Howard School, like learning letters, learning how to talk and communicate more. We even had identical assignments. And also, like with Howard School, the class also got to go to the Y and go swimming again every Monday like at the other school, but this time I declined to not go by telling the teachers I did not want to go, and luckily they said that I didn't have to and my mom would pick me up. The teacher I had was named Janice, and I thought she was a really nice teacher and really cool too. An assistant named Yvette, who was also really nice. Wow, even like 36 years ago, I could just remember them vividly, and just, man, my heart just goes out to them. The fire alarms in that school weren't as loud and scary during fire drills, and I didn't mind it as much, which I thought was a good thing. However, I started misbehaving a bit more back then, and sometimes the teachers wasn't sure how to discipline me properly. My ADHD side of me would sometimes get hyper, and I would sometimes get disruptive and do crazy things. One time I went on top of the table, and one time I threw a chair just for the heck of it because I thought it was funny. Each kid in the class had a chart, and when a kid would misbehave, the teacher would put a sad face on the chart. And I actually thought the sad faces looked funny, so sometimes I would purposely misbehave so that way a teacher would put the sad face on the chart because I would like it. Eventually, the teachers stopped putting sad faces and just simply wrote down what I did to misbehave, and I didn't really like that as much. I then willingly made more effort to try to behave more, but I found that to be a struggle. One time I drew this complex geometric pattern of shapes with a black crayon with a bunch of triangles that went into infinity, kind of like a fractile, and I got in big time trouble, and as a punishment, I was made to wash off the crayon with a black washcloth during recess. Obviously, that didn't work out so well. Eventually, my amazing teacher Janice came up with a brilliant plan to help me behave better. She came up with an amazing method that involved positive reinforcement that really worked. Each week she made a 5-day chart where if I was good during the day, I would receive a stamp, and if I received 5 stamps for the week, then my mom would buy me a train like a Thomas the Tank Engine that I used to love at the toy store, and Thomas the Tank Engine was starting to become popular back then. And this was when my obsession with trains peaked, and so I definitely was excited about that, and it gave me motivation to be better behaved during the week. I ended up getting 5 different trains. I got Gordon, I got the green engine Henry, and the red engine, I don't remember the name of that. And I think I got Thomas, and then that square looking engine that looked like a box that had wheels that went down a track. I remember there was just only 1 week where I didn't succeed, and I was really upset. My mom felt bad, and she rented a movie, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. I guess just to at least acknowledge that I put in good effort. There was this one kid in the classroom that I grew to really like, and I considered him as a friend, even though I didn't hang out with him outside of school, kind of like that kid from Howard School, and ironically, his name was also Christopher. I used to like that I used to laugh at things all the time, and sometimes I would say things and enjoy making him laugh, and sometimes we would laugh together, disrupt the class sometimes, and sometimes we would even get in trouble because the teachers didn't understand some of the stuff that we said, that we would make ourselves laugh all the time. Good memories. As much as I love the school year, I got to talk about a couple of negatives. And the first thing was, like back in Howard School, there was a couple of kids in the class that often had runny noses, and again, I thought it was disgusting and I couldn't stand it. And then coupled with the fact that some of the kids often ate sloppy during lunch, where they often had food all over their face, it was often repulsive, and I tried to block it out, but it was hard. I thought about it for a while and eventually came up with a strategic plan to minimize the chances of having to sit across from them on the table. When we would line up at lunch, I would try to line up lines so the other kids were in front of me, but not so far at the end of the line where I couldn't choose where to sit either. My so-called plan did help, but it didn't always work perfect every day. One time I puked during lunch. I puked on the lunchroom table, and then the teacher walked me to the nurse, and on the way to the nurse down the hallway, I puked a couple more times as the custodian followed me with a mop. I went to the nurse's office, and the teachers called my mom, and I went home. And to this very day, they probably thought I was sick that day, but that wasn't the reason. Eventually, summer rolled around, and the school year was over, and it was nothing but a memory, but a good memory that I treasure every day. Then when I turned 6 during the 3rd year, I went to the school called SMEC School. The school building looked like a small double-wide mobile home trailer that was placed in the lawn right next to the East Fairhaven school building. There was the same amount of kids, about 7 kids, but there was more teachers. There was actually 5 teachers, and they were all really strict. These kids had similar neurological developments to the other 2 schools I had. Some of the kids had behavioral issues, which honestly I thought was kind of entertaining to watch. To be honest, since I was pretty much the only one that misbehaved the most during the last 2 schools, it was kind of a breath of fresh air to finally see other people that also misbehaved too. It kind of made me not feel out of place. I made friends with this one kid named Chandler at that school, and I felt like we had a lot in common, and I really liked him. Not only he had outbursts over the same sort of situations and reasons that I did, which I kind of related to him, and we also had a lot of similar interests. I started getting into Nintendo at that time, and my friend used to info dump about Mario all the time and talk about facts that was really interesting, stuff you wouldn't hear about even on YouTube these days. I think he was a really smart kid, and I admired his passion, and I also admired his unique way of explaining things, the way he observed things and acknowledged things. Unfortunately, I was never able to keep in touch with him after this school, and I wonder to this day how his life was and what he's been doing and how his school was and what he's doing right now. If you know a guy named Chandler Lawton, I think that's how you pronounce his last name. He used to live in Westport, Massachusetts, maybe Dartmouth. Please let me know. I would love to reach out to him. One thing a lot of the kids often did is that they a lot of times pooped in their pants to get on the teacher's nerves. It was pretty much a daily occurrence. At least one kid, or maybe 2, would poop in their pants, and the teachers would have to take them in the bathroom to clean themselves up. The teachers never liked it, I don't blame them, but I'm pretty sure the kids did it on purpose. In fact, my aide later told me that the kids did do it on purpose. When we would draw in class, I often wanted to draw power lines, but the teachers often didn't let me because they wanted me to draw normal things that kids often like to draw, and I didn't like that. And they even sent me to timeout if I drew them anyway. Another thing I often didn't like was if we misbehaved, the teachers would often put her head down on the desk or table by holding down for about 10 to 15 seconds. I didn't like it, and a lot of the other kids didn't either. Another thing I didn't like about that school is that my teachers made my parents communicate with each other through a notebook, meaning they would write everything down that I would do during school and at home. So that meant if I misbehaved at home, I would get in trouble at school. And if I got in trouble at school, I would get in trouble at home as well. I mean, it was a good way to motivate me to behave, but it pretty much meant my teachers were on my butt 24/7. The fire alarm in that school was obnoxiously loud. In fact, it was so loud it sounded like those horns that you hear in fire trucks that blast at cars to get their attention during emergency routes. Imagine hearing something like that blast inside unexpectedly in an enclosed area no bigger than a trailer. Yep, that's what we experienced during a fire drill. It was so loud, not only it scared me, but it was actually kind of traumatic. I remember one night staying up almost all night because I just could not get the thought of that fire alarm out of my head, and it just made me scared. And like with Howard at East Fairhaven School, we also went to the Y every Monday to go swimming. But with this school, with the strict teachers, I was required to go. So I had to endure the crazy smell of chlorine, which often made me feel exhausted. After swimming, I often would just lay down and feel exhausted. And we called it swimming lessons. One time during swimming lessons, one of the kids pooped in the pool, and we had to all get out, and they had to suck all the water out of the pool to clean it out. There was a lot of good things about that school, and I actually have a lot of great memories, even though the teachers were really strict. My parents would say, "Oh man, your teachers are so strict," and they actually kind of felt bad, but I actually really liked the teachers, and I liked the things that we did. Overall, the day was fun, and we used to go on these cool field trips. Every Wednesday, we would cook food, and I just enjoyed it. One thing I like about SMEC that I kind of didn't like at the time, but I'm happy about now, was I learned about basic addition and math, which definitely made it easier to do math when I was in first grade. I also did a lot when it came to learning how to read too. However, it didn't really quite go so well though. During the whole entire year, I literally learned like 40 different flashcards of different basic sight words. I learned every flashcard like this. The problem was I wasn't actually learning the freaking words when I could have, because each flashcard was written differently with different markers, with different handwriting written by different teachers. So I was actually learning the words based on what the flashcards looked like, not by the actual spelling of the words. Now fast forward to first, second, and third grade when reading was a major struggle with me. Imagine if I actually did learn the words. That would have been a huge head start and would have been really helpful back then, which is kind of a bummer. I stayed in school through the summer. However, near the end of the summer, I was ready to start first grade. Both me and my friend Chandler. The head teacher was proud of us, but she was also sad for us to go. As Chandler headed off to his new school in first grade, I wondered to this very day how it unfolded. And for me, also going to first grade in a new school, I had no idea what my future was going to unfold and what the journey was going to be like. But I want to let you know it was a pretty crazy experience, and I'm going to talk about it in a future upcoming video, so stay tuned.